The papers arrived on a Tuesday morning, slipped through the mail slot in a plain white envelope with the name of a law firm I didn't recognize in the top left corner. I stood at the door in my old flannel shirt and socks, holding the envelope for a long time before I opened it. I already knew what was inside. Not because I had expected it, not because she had warned me, but because somewhere deep in the part of me that pays attention to small things I had felt it coming for months. The absence of her keys on the hook by the door. The coffee mug she left in the drying rack that never got put away because there was no one to remind me. The way the bed had too much space in it now, even when I slept in the middle. I carried the envelope to the kitchen table and sat down. I made myself coffee first. Black, 2 sugars, the way I had made it for myself every morning since she left. She used to take hers with oat milk and a little cinnamon. I had stopped buying oat milk in October. I didn't throw out the cinnamon, though. I still don't know exactly why. I opened the envelope. The papers were exactly what I expected. Clean, legal, final. Claire Morrison versus Caleb Morrison. Dissolution of marriage. 5 years, 3 months, 12 days reduced to 22 pages of formatted language that made the whole thing feel like a business transaction that had simply run its course. I read them slowly, every page, every paragraph. I noticed she had initialed a few places but had not yet signed the final page. Her lawyer's instructions, probably. Wait for the respondent. The respondent was me. I sat with the papers spread across the kitchen table for a long time. The coffee went cold. The morning light moved across the floor the way it always does in November in Oregon. Thin and pale, like it was apologizing for not being warmer. And I thought about Claire, not the version of her who had packed a single bag and moved into a furnished apartment in Portland 7 months ago. I thought about the one I met at 24. Standing in the rain outside a bookshop on Hawthorne Avenue, holding an umbrella that was completely useless because the wind had already turned it inside out. She was laughing at it. Not frustrated, not embarrassed. Just laughing, like the whole situation was the funniest thing she had encountered all week. That was the woman I had married. I picked up a pen. I turned to the first page. There was a blank line near my name where I was supposed to sign. I held the pen over that line for 1 moment, just one, and then I wrote in my regular handwriting, not small, not large, the only true thing I could think of. I still love you. I turned to the second page. I still love you. By the time I reached the 22nd page, my hand was steady. My eyes were not, but my hand was perfectly, completely steady. I folded the papers back into the original envelope, wrote her address on the front, the apartment in Portland I had never visited, and drove to the post office in my truck, in my socks, because I had forgotten to put shoes on. I mailed them back. Then I went home, made fresh coffee, and waited. But let me take you back to where this really started. Not the envelope on a Tuesday morning. Not even the bag she packed in the early hours of a cold April night while I sat on the edge of the bed pretending to be asleep because I didn't know what words existed for what we were becoming. Let me take you back further. To the beginning, before any of that. Before we became a story about silence and distance and 2 people standing in the same house like strangers who had simply run out of things to say. Let me take you back to the bookshop on Hawthorne Avenue. I was 24 years old, recently moved to Portland, newly hired as a history teacher at Jefferson High. I had no furniture except a bed frame and a second-hand bookshelf. I had no friends in the city yet, just colleagues who were still deciding whether I was interesting enough to talk to outside of staff meetings. I had a lot of time on my hands and a habit of spending rainy afternoons in used bookshops that smelled like old paper and cedar, which was either a healthy coping mechanism or a convenient way to avoid figuring out my actual life. Either way, it got me to Hawthorne Avenue on a November afternoon, and that is the only thing I can say with complete certainty was the right choice I made that entire year. She was outside when I arrived, standing under the small awning with a broken umbrella and an expression of complete amusement at her own situation. Her coat was dark green, her hair was getting wet, and she clearly did not care. I almost walked past her. I don't know why I stopped, except that she looked at me when I came up the steps and said, entirely unprompted, "For the record, I looked up the weather this morning." "And?" I said. "It said partly cloudy," which I feel is doing a lot of dishonest work today. I looked at the sky, which was doing the precise opposite of partly cloudy. Meteorology is more of an art than a science, I said. She pointed at me like I had said something she had been waiting to hear all day. Exactly what I keep telling people. We talked for 20 minutes under that awning before either of us went inside. She was 22, a second-year architecture student at Portland State. She had opinions about everything: urban planning, the ethics of historical preservation, why certain fonts were ruining public signage, why the best sandwiches were always found in the most unremarkable buildings. She laughed easily and listened carefully, and had this way of pausing before she said something important, like she was making sure she had chosen the exact right words. I was completely gone before I fully understood what was happening. We had coffee 2 days later, dinner the week after that. By January, I knew I was in trouble in the best possible way, and by March I had stopped pretending otherwise. She used to fall asleep on my couch on Friday nights with a book on her chest, and I would sit in the chair across from her and think, quietly, that I had never understood before what people meant when they said someone felt like home. I understood it then. It was not dramatic. It was just the specific feeling of being exactly where you were supposed to be. We were together 3 years before I asked her to marry me, and I asked her in the kitchen of our small apartment with flour on my hands because I had been attempting to make her birthday cake, and I had just realized that everything I wanted for the rest of my life was standing 4 feet away from me, pretending not to notice that I had flour on my nose. She said yes before I even finished asking. For the first 2 years of our marriage, we were genuinely happy. Not the performed kind that people photograph and post. The kind that lives in Tuesday evenings and Saturday mornings. The kind that sounds like 2 people doing dishes and talking about nothing while the radio plays too quietly to actually hear. She was climbing fast at her architecture firm, smart and tireless in ways I admired without reservation. I was at school 5 days a week, coaching junior varsity soccer on Tuesdays, spending summers building shelving units and cooking dinners that she appreciated even when she got home too late to eat them warm. We were not perfect. We had our versions of the same arguments most couples have, about time, about money, about whose turn it was to call the plumber. But we had a foundation. We understood each other. When she was stressed, she needed silence and space, not reassurance. When I was worried about something, I needed to say it out loud even if I already knew the answer. We had learned these things about each other and built around them. That is what love actually looks like past the first year, not fireworks, architecture. Small, careful choices made again and again until the structure holds. And then we lost the baby. We were not even certain it would happen yet. The pregnancy was just past 10 weeks, and we had been cautiously, privately hopeful in the way you are when something feels too fragile to say aloud. We hadn't told anyone. Claire had been a little sick in the mornings, tired in a way that was different from her usual tired. I had started looking up cribs online late at night on my phone, the way you do things you're not ready to commit to but cannot stop thinking about. We had one ultrasound photo in a drawer in the kitchen, tucked under the takeout menus, as if keeping it hidden might protect it. I was at school when she called. 3rd period, right in the middle of a lecture on the First World War. I felt the phone buzz in my pocket and ignored it, and then it buzzed again, and something in the timing of it made me step into the hallway. She didn't cry on the phone. She told me in the same quiet, controlled voice she used when presenting to clients. She said the words. She said she was at the clinic and she was okay and I didn't need to come unless I wanted to. I told her I was already leaving. She said, "Caleb, you don't have to." I said, "I know," and I left anyway. We got through it. That is what I told myself for a long time afterward. We got through it. We did not fall apart, we functioned. We went back to work and made dinner and had normal conversations about normal things and were, by every external measure, fine. But we never talked about it. Not really. Not the way it needed to be talked about. I tried once, about 2 weeks after, and Claire looked at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Not grief exactly, but something like grief that had already started hardening into something else, and she said, "I'd rather not go back there right now." I said, "Okay." I meant it to be temporary. I meant to try again in a week or a month when she was ready. I kept waiting for her to be ready. The distance started so gradually that I couldn't have told you when it began. She worked later. I stopped waiting up. She traveled more for projects out of state and came home quieter each time, like she was leaving small pieces of herself somewhere else with every trip. I stopped making dinner for two on the nights she wasn't sure she'd be home. Small adjustments, practical accommodations, none of them dramatic. All of them adding up to something I didn't have a name for yet. By the third year of our marriage, we were sleeping in the same bed and living separate lives. And I think we both knew it, and neither of us knew how to say it without making it irreversible. Some nights I would reach across the space between us in the dark, and she would be right there, warm and breathing, close enough to touch. And yet the distance between us felt enormous, not hostile. That would have been easier, in a way. Something to push against. This was just the quiet accumulation of all the things we had stopped saying until the silences outnumbered the conversations and neither of us could remember exactly when that had happened. She left on an April night. I heard her moving through the room quietly in the dark, and I kept my breathing even and my eyes closed. Not because I had given up, but because I was so afraid of saying the wrong thing and losing her completely that I chose to say nothing at all. She left without waking me. She left a note on the kitchen table that said, "I'm sorry. I need some time to think. I love you." See, I kept that note in my wallet for 7 months. She called on Thursday, 2 days after I mailed the papers back. I was grading student essays at the kitchen table when my phone lit up with her name, and my heart did the thing it always did when I saw it there. That small, involuntary lift, like a reflex the rest of me hadn't managed to unlearn. Caleb. Her voice was careful, controlled in the way it got when she was working hard not to feel something. Hey, a pause. I got the papers. I figured you didn't sign them. No. Another pause, longer. I could hear traffic in the background. She was probably outside her apartment building. She always went outdoors for difficult calls. Something about open air, she used to say. It was easier to breathe. You wrote on them, she said. I did. On every page. On every page, I confirmed. The silence stretched between us. Then she said, voice quieter, almost careful. What are you doing, Caleb? Answering a question you asked me. I didn't ask you a question. I asked you to sign. The papers asked me if I was done. I said, I'm not done. She made a sound I couldn't fully name. Not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh. Somewhere between the two, like a word she couldn't bring herself to say out loud. My lawyer is going to have thoughts about this. Your lawyer can call my lawyer. You don't have a lawyer. Then your lawyer can call me directly. I'm very available. I grade papers on Tuesday evenings and I have no plans on weekends. Caleb. My name in her voice, just 2 syllables, weighted with everything. Claire. The traffic sounds continued in the background. I waited. I'm coming to get the originals, she finally said. Okay. I just need you to sign them. That's all I'm asking. I know, I said. Come get them. She came on Saturday morning. I heard the car in the driveway just before 9 and I was already in the kitchen when she knocked, which felt wrong in itself, the fact that she knocked at all. This was still her house, legally, technically, and she knocked like a visitor. I let her in and she stood in the doorway for a moment, taking in the kitchen with an expression I couldn't fully read, like she was looking for evidence of how I had been living. The same table, the same shelves I had built in our second summer here, the coffee maker we had bought together at the farmer's market from a man who made them by hand and charged a price that horrified me and delighted her. She looked older somehow. Not in a bad way. More settled into herself, like the months apart had sharpened something in her face. She was wearing a coat I didn't recognize, dark gray wool, and her hair was down in the way she almost never wore it anymore. She was still the most beautiful person I had ever seen in my life. You made coffee, she said. I made enough for 2. She looked at me for a second, then sat down. I got a second mug and turned to the counter. I put oat milk in hers without thinking about it. I heard her go very still behind me when I set it down in front of her. The oat milk, the small sprinkle of cinnamon on top. You still have oat milk, she said quietly. I never stopped buying it. She wrapped both hands around the mug and looked down at the table. I sat across from her. The papers lay between us. 22 pages. I still love you 22 times in my regular handwriting. She didn't touch them. She just looked. This is not how divorce works, she said. I know, Caleb. I need you to understand something. She looked up. Her eyes were steady, but there was something behind them working hard to stay that way. I'm not doing this to hurt you. I'm doing this because I think we've both been stuck for a very long time, and I think you deserve more than stuck. What I deserve, I said carefully, is a conversation. Not a 22-page document that asks me to agree we're finished. We are finished. But the way she said it, half a second too slow, a fraction too quiet. Say that again, I said. She looked at me. What? Say it again. We are finished. Say it like you mean it. She looked down at her coffee. She didn't say it again. The kitchen was quiet except for the rain that had started outside, light and steady against the window. I thought about the bookshop on Hawthorne Avenue and a woman with a broken umbrella who had told me the weather forecast was dishonest. I've been waiting for you for 3 years, I said. My voice came out low. Not angry, just honest. Waiting for you to come back to wherever we were before we lost the baby and you decided to carry that alone. I kept telling myself I would find the right words, I would wait until you were ready. But you never told me when ready was. You just got further away, quietly, one small step at a time. Until one April night you packed a bag and I lay there and listened to the sound of the zipper and chose silence because I was so terrified of losing you that I said nothing at all. She had gone completely still, and now you're sitting in my kitchen asking me to sign 22 pages that say we're done, I continued. And I'm telling you I wrote the only true thing I know on every single one of them. Her eyes were full by the time I stopped. She didn't let the tears fall. She was extraordinary at that, had been her whole life, a skill learned early from necessity. But her hands were tight around the mug, and she was barely breathing. Tell me what happened to us, I said. Not the legal version, the real one. Because I've been living with my half of this story for 3 years and I still don't understand yours. For a long moment she said nothing. I watched her work through something, whatever wall she had built between herself and this particular conversation, and I waited the way I had always learned to wait for her. Quietly, without pressing. She needed to get there herself. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. After the miscarriage, she said, I went back to the clinic for a follow-up. By myself. I didn't tell you because I thought I was fine. I thought I just needed to confirm it medically and move forward, and the doctor asked me if I was sleeping. I said yes. She asked if I had support. I said yes. And then she looked at me in this very gentle way and said, It's okay to not be okay. She stopped, breathed, and I sat in that exam room alone and I thought, I am making him worry. I am making him carry something I can't even name yet. I am already too much for this life we're trying to build. I opened my mouth. She shook her head. Let me finish. She breathed again. I convinced myself that the kindest thing I could do for you was to take up less space, to be less of a problem. I threw myself into work because work had clear outcomes. You put in the hours, you get the result. Grief had no such logic. And the further I got from you, the more I told myself it was for your benefit, that you would be better off without the version of me that broke that year, that you would find someone lighter, someone easier, someone who didn't need to be held together. She looked at the table, and by the time I understood that I was just running, that I had been running since the morning of that phone call, I had gone so far that I didn't know how to come back without admitting that I had wasted both of our time. The rain tapped softly against the window. You thought you were protecting me, I said. I thought I was setting you free. Her voice cracked on the last word. Just slightly. Just barely. I stood up and walked around the table. I crouched down beside her chair so we were at the same level. I waited until she looked at me. Claire, I said, the day we lost that baby, I drove home from the clinic and I sat in the driveway for 40 minutes before I could make myself go inside. Not because I was falling apart, because I was terrified that you were, and I didn't know how to be strong enough for both of us at the same time. And then you came out of it with this incredible composure, and you said you'd rather not go back there, and I respected that. I kept respecting it. I kept giving you space because I thought that was love. I shook my head slowly. I didn't know I was just letting you disappear. She looked at me for a long time. Then, voice thick and barely there. You kept buying oat milk for 7 months, every week, every single week. I met her eyes. I was not done, Claire. I was never done. I was just waiting for you to find your way back. She put her hand over her face, and the tears she had been holding since she walked in the door finally came. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly, steadily, the way Oregon rain falls when it has been building long enough. I stayed right beside her. I did not rush her. This moment belonged to her. After a while she lowered her hand. Her eyes were red and her face was unguarded in a way I had not seen in years. Not composed, not managed, just entirely, completely her. She looked at the 22 pages on the table. Then she looked at me. I don't know how to undo 3 years, she said. We don't undo them, I said. We figure out what comes next. She was quiet. The rain continued outside. I'm not the same person I was, she said. Neither am I. We would have to start almost from the beginning. Not the beginning, I said. We keep the parts that were always real. She looked at me. Which parts were real? I reached across and placed my hand over hers on the table. She turned her hand over and held mine. That was enough for right now. We did not reconcile that Saturday. I want to say that clearly because the truth of what happened between us did not move fast, and it should not have. We had 3 years of silence to work through, and we were not going to dismantle it in a single conversation over cold coffee while the rain came down. Claire went back to her apartment that afternoon with the divorce papers still unsigned. She left the oat milk in the fridge. She left her dark gray coat on the hook by the door. I did not say a word about it. I just left it there. She called her lawyer on Monday and asked to pause the proceedings. She texted me on Wednesday to say she had found a therapist. Individual sessions first, to sort through her own things before she brought them back to us. I told her that sounded like the right order. She said, I seem to always figure things out backwards, don't I? I said, you have always been the smarter one, so maybe backwards is faster. She sent back a single laughing emoji. It was the first light thing she had sent me in years, and I stared at my phone screen for an embarrassingly long time afterward. We had coffee the following Saturday. Not at the house. A place in the city, neutral ground, no history loaded into the walls. We talked for 2 hours about nothing major. Her projects, my students, a book she was reading, a documentary I had watched twice. It felt careful the way that new things feel careful before they understand what they are. It also felt more real than the last year of our marriage had. The Saturdays became a habit. 3 months after that first Saturday, we started seeing a couples therapist named Dr. Anand, a quiet man with reading glasses and a deeply patient expression who had the particular skill of asking exactly the question you had been avoiding for so long it had become invisible. In our first session, he asked us both to describe the moment we had felt most alone in our marriage. Claire said, the night she came home from a work trip in February to find me asleep on the couch waiting up, dinner cold on the stove, and she had stood in the dark kitchen and thought, he deserves someone who comes home on time. I said, the night she packed her bag while I pretended to sleep, listening to the sound of the zipper, saying nothing. Dr. Anand looked at us both for a long moment. Then he said, so you were both, in the same marriage, trying to love each other by making yourselves smaller. Neither of us had an answer for that. It took time. That is the only honest way I know to say it. It took time, and it was not clean, and there were sessions where we both left the building separately and didn't speak until the following day, and there were nights I drove home alone wondering if the man who had written I still love you across 22 pages of legal documents was just a man who was afraid of change dressed up as a man who understood love. I asked myself that question more than once in the dark on the way home. There was one session where Dr. Anand asked us each to name one thing the other person had done, in the hardest stretch of our marriage, that we had never acknowledged. Claire was quiet for a long time. Then she said that on the night she came home very late from a work trip, and found the kitchen dark and a plate left covered for her in the microwave. She had stood in front of it for 5 minutes and cried before she ate, because she had expected to come home to nothing, and there was still the plate. She had never told me that. I had never known. I had just covered the plate. Because that was what you did for someone you loved and were still quietly hoping would come back to you. I gripped the arm of my chair and looked out the window at the parking lot, and did not trust myself to speak for almost a full minute. But then Saturday would come, and she would be sitting across from me, and she would say something that was entirely, specifically, irreducibly her, some observation about a font on a storefront sign, some opinion about the ethics of architectural restoration, some small exact true thing that no one else would ever think to say, and I would know the answer without having to look for it. 6 months after she paused the proceedings, she asked if she could come to the house for dinner. Not to move back in, not yet, just to cook. She wanted to use the kitchen. I said yes. She arrived with groceries and spent 2 hours at the stove, and I sat on the counter and talked to her while she cooked, the way we used to, and it felt like the most ordinary thing in the world, and also like something I had been quietly starving for without fully admitting it. She stayed until 11. When she left, she put on the gray wool coat and paused at the door. "The oat milk is still in the fridge," I said. She smiled. Not a careful smile, not a managed one, but a real one. The full kind that started in her eyes and moved outward. "I noticed," she said. She came back the following week. And the week after that, the day she moved back in was a Sunday in March. I did not make a ceremony of it. I helped her carry boxes from her car, and we had sandwiches on the back porch even though it was barely warm enough, and we talked about where to put her drafting table, and whether the spare room had enough natural light for her work, and whether we should finally repaint the kitchen. A conversation we had been having since the first year of our marriage without ever doing it. It was ordinary, quiet, exactly what it needed to be. At one point, she stopped in the middle of the hallway, holding a box of drafting pencils, and looked around at the walls and the floors and the afternoon light coming through the glass, and she said, very softly, "It still smells the same." I asked what it smelled like. She thought about it. "Cedar," she said, "and coffee, and like nothing bad can stay forever." I did not say anything. I just picked up the next box. That evening I went to the kitchen drawer and moved aside the takeout menus. Underneath them, exactly where we had left it, was the ultrasound photo. I carried it to the living room where she was unpacking a box of books. I held it out without saying anything. She took it from my hands and held it carefully with both of hers. She looked at it for a long time. "Thank you for keeping it," she said finally. "It was ours," I said. "It stays." She nodded. She set the photo on the shelf, between two of her architecture books, in the strip of light that came through the window in the afternoons. Then she went back to unpacking, and I went to make dinner, and the house settled around both of us the way a house does when it finally has the right number of people in it. I still have the divorce papers. All 22 pages folded in the drawer of my bedside table, still carrying "I still love you" in my handwriting on every single one. I don't look at them often, but sometimes, on the nights when everything we went through feels close to the surface, I take them out and hold them for a minute. Not with sadness, not with regret, with something closer to gratitude for the Tuesday morning when I sat down at that kitchen table and chose the true thing over the easy thing. For the pen in my hand and the steadiness of it, for the post office, and my socks, and the cold coffee, and the thin November light moving across the floor. If you have ever loved someone so much that losing them felt like losing a version of yourself you hadn't yet finished becoming, you will understand why I couldn't sign. You will understand why no lawyer's language, no carefully formatted legal document, no box to check or line to initial could reduce what we were to something that needed to be dissolved. Some things are not transactions. Some things, even broken and silent and scared of themselves, are still worth the work of being put back together. Sometimes the most important thing you will ever say in your life does not come to you in a speech or a letter or a perfect rehearsed moment. Sometimes it comes to you at a kitchen table, with the coffee going cold and 22 blank lines waiting for your signature. And you have to be willing to write the honest thing even when you don't yet know if anyone will hear it. She heard it, that is the whole story, and the only ending I know how to give it. Not a perfect life, we are not perfect people, and we know it better now than we ever did before. But a real one, built on the parts that were always honest, reinforced slowly by the things we finally learned to say out loud, held together by two people who chose in the end not the easiest version of each other, but the truest one. Last November, she suggested we go back to Hawthorne Avenue. Breakfast at the place with the good pastries around the corner from the old bookshop, she said. We walked past the awning where she had been standing with the broken umbrella the afternoon I met her. She stopped for a moment and looked at it. Then she looked at me. It's partly cloudy today, she said. I looked at the sky. It was raining. She laughed, the full, unguarded, completely herself laugh that I fell in love with on a rainy November afternoon when I was 24 years old and had flour on my nose and everything ahead of me that I didn't know yet. I took her hand. We went to breakfast.